modern superheroes.
How does a man who fled systemic brutality in his homeland become a beacon of hope for justice in exile? This is the extraordinary story of Roman Rukevich, a man whose relentless courage transformed him from a lone advocate in a dangerous system into a hero inspiring international solidarity. In a land where oppression thrived unchecked and silence was the rule, Roman's voice emerged as a defiant stand against the tide, a voice that sought to expose the brutal truths hidden within prison walls and beyond. Roman's mission began quietly, almost invisibly, as he set out to unearth the injustices buried deep within his homeland's criminal system. He wasn't a politician or a public figure, just an ordinary citizen who could no longer look away. Through the anti-torture movement, he became a symbol of resistance, challenging a system designed to crush dissent. His work revealed a grim reality. Prisoners weren't just serving sentences. They were enduring torture, stripped of their dignity, and used as pawns in a cruel game of power and control. These weren't isolated incidents. They were systemic, carefully hidden from public view, and meticulously protected by those in power. At great personal risk, Roman unmasked the perpetrators, those shielded by their anonymity and the complicity of the state. Each expose revealed the names, faces, and roles of enforcers who thrived on violence. The risks were immense. With every revelation, Roman found himself deeper in danger. Anonymous threats began pouring in. Stop or face the consequences. But Roman didn't stop. He doubled down, using encrypted channels and online platforms to amplify the voices of victims and whistleblowers. For the first time, the silenced had a champion who refused to look away. The more Roman exposed, the higher the stakes became. Families of victims reached out to him, pleading for help. Whistleblowers, emboldened by his bravery, began to share documents and testimonies. But amidst the wave of truth-telling came a grim realization. His work had painted a target on his back. The threats became more coordinated, more direct. Messages arrived with chilling warnings, details about his movements, and hints of what could happen next. Roman began living with a constant awareness that any moment could be his last. Faced with the weight of these threats, Roman made a heartbreaking decision: to leave his homeland. Staying meant certain capture, torture, or worse. Leaving meant abandoning everything: his roots, his community, and the people he had vowed to protect. But Roman understood that survival wasn't just for himself. It was for the mission, for the countless voices that still needed to be heard. With nothing but his courage and his resolve, he fled into the unknown. Landing in France, Roman stepped into a world entirely unfamiliar, yet profoundly different. From the moment he arrived, he was greeted with something he had fought for his entire life, but rarely experienced: dignity. At the airport, officials didn't question his motives or his character. They welcomed him. They explained his rights, ensured he understood the asylum process, and offered him a sense of safety he hadn't felt in years. For a man who had lived under constant threat, this was more than a new chapter. It was a revelation. Roman's story didn't end in exile. It evolved. France became both a refuge and a stage for his ongoing mission. Strangers who had never met him rallied to his side. Volunteers like Edith, who learned about his plight, went out of their way to ensure he had shelter, food, and the resources to rebuild his life. Edith's generosity was just one example of the global solidarity that began to surround Roman. Human rights organizations amplified his work, and citizens moved by his bravery reached out with donations, messages of support, and offers of help. But the dangers didn't disappear. Even in France, Roman couldn't escape the long shadow of the system he had challenged. Threats continued to follow him, a reminder of the risks he had taken and the enemies he had made. Yet Roman's resolve remained unshaken. He continued his work, determined to expose corruption, to share the stories of victims, and to ensure that the truth he had fought so hard to reveal would never be silenced. Roman's journey also became a source of inspiration for others. His story resonated with people around the world, not just victims of oppression, but ordinary citizens who saw in him the extraordinary power of one individual's conviction. They saw a man who had lost everything, yet refused to abandon his principles. His courage became a beacon, showing that even in the face of overwhelming odds, justice is worth the fight. Today, Roman's mission is far from over. His work continues to ripple across borders, inspiring new movements, new voices, and new hope. His journey is more than a tale of survival. It is a testament to the extraordinary power of truth. Roman's story reminds us that even in the darkest corners of the world, light can prevail. His life is a call to action. For all who believe that no matter how entrenched oppression may seem, it is no match for the will of those who dare to stand against it. Roman's journey into the heart of activism was not born from ambition, but from necessity. He grew up in a small town, the kind of place where life moved slowly, and ambitions were shaped by the limits of the world around you. His childhood was modest, marked by evenings spent with his family around a crackling fireplace and days of hard work that instilled discipline and resilience. Yet, in that small town, there was an unspoken code. Keep your head down, don't question authority, and life will move on. Roman wasn't one to blindly follow. His father, a quiet but principled man, often said, "A world that tolerates injustice will never know peace." These words stayed with Roman, even as he watched neighbors and acquaintances lose everything to a justice system that seemed to serve no one but itself. One incident that left a lasting impression on him was the arrest of a local shopkeeper, a kind man who had always lent a hand to struggling families. The man was taken in the dead of night, accused of a petty crime, and returned months later as a shadow of his former self. Rumors spread of the horrors he endured in custody, but no one dared to speak openly. This, Roman realized, was the invisible chain keeping his community in fear. As Roman grew older, these stories became impossible to ignore. Tales of arrests without reason, lives destroyed behind bars, and torture used as a tool of control began to surface with alarming regularity. These weren't just whispers. They were cries for help from people Roman knew personally. The justice system, meant to protect the people, had become a weapon wielded against them. While many accepted this as the grim reality of life, Roman's sense of fairness couldn't let it rest. Each story stoked a fire in him, igniting a desire to confront the invisible forces that perpetuated this cruelty. Roman's awakening wasn't sudden. It was a gradual process shaped by years of witnessing pain and injustice. He began to ask the hard questions no one dared to utter. Who was responsible for this? How could these acts of cruelty continue unpunished? Most importantly, what could be done to stop them? The answers he found were sobering, yet they also gave him clarity. If the system thrived in darkness, then exposing it to light was the first step to dismantling it. It was in the midst of this realization that Roman founded Anti-Torture, a digital platform that would become both a lifeline for victims and a weapon against perpetrators. At first, it was a modest effort, a website created in the quiet hours of the night on an outdated laptop. But its mission was ambitious: to give the voiceless a platform, to document abuses with irrefutable evidence, and to drag the guilty out of the shadows. Roman knew the risks, but he also knew the stakes. For every story left untold, another victim would suffer in silence. Through Anti-Torture, Roman unearthed a flood of stories. Men and women, beaten beyond recognition for confessions they didn't make. Families torn apart as loved ones disappeared into a system that offered no accountability. The evidence was staggering, and with each report, the cracks in the facade of the justice system grew wider. Roman didn't just share these stories, he connected them, weaving a larger narrative that revealed a systematic pattern of abuse and corruption. His work was relentless, meticulous, and deeply personal. The risks, however, were immense. As Anti-Torture gained traction, so too did the attention it drew from those who had everything to lose. Threats came swiftly and often. Anonymous emails warned him to stop. His address was leaked online in an attempt to intimidate him. One particularly chilling message read, "We know where you live. Stop now, or we'll stop you." Roman knew these threats weren't empty. He had seen the lengths to which those in power would go to maintain control. Yet, rather than retreat, Roman pressed forward. He adopted new precautions, encrypted communications, secure data storage, and a growing network of trusted allies. He understood that fear was the weapon of his enemies, and he refused to wield it himself. His resolve only grew stronger with each new revelation, each new story that found its way to Anti-Torture. One story stands out as a turning point. A whistleblower from within the justice system reached out to Roman with damning evidence. This individual had first-hand knowledge of rehabilitation centers that were, in reality, torture camps. The whistleblower provided photographs, documents, and detailed accounts of the atrocities committed there. Roman worked tirelessly to verify the information, knowing that any error could undermine his credibility and endanger lives. When he finally published the exposé, it sent shockwaves across the region. International human rights organizations took notice, and for the first time, the perpetrators faced scrutiny on a global stage. But this victory came at a steep cost. The whistleblower was forced to flee, their life now in constant danger. And Roman, his name rose to the top of the government's list. The authorities began targeting him, framing their actions as ensuring national security. Friends begged him to stop, to think of his own safety. Yet Roman couldn't walk away. Every threat, every risk, every risk, every risk, every risk sacrifice was a reminder of why he had started this fight. His mission was no longer just about exposing injustice. It was about ensuring that no one had to face it alone. Roman's early battles were defined by these moments, small but significant victories against an immense and oppressive system. For every whistleblower who risked everything to come forward, for every victim whose story was finally heard, Roman saw the flickers of change. Each exposé, each corrupt official unmasked, was a step toward a future where justice might finally prevail. And for Roman, that fight was worth everything. Roman's decision to flee his homeland was not an act of cowardice, but one of sheer necessity. The threats against him had escalated from veiled warnings to explicit promises of harm. Anonymous messages described his daily movements with chilling accuracy. His address was shared on social media forums tied to state loyalists. And then came the final straw, a photograph of his apartment building sent to him with the caption, "We know where to find you." Roman realized that staying was no longer an option. To remain meant imprisonment, torture, or worse. The decision was heart-wrenching, but it was clear he had to leave everything behind. Fleeing wasn't just a physical departure, it was a deeply emotional severance. Roman had spent years giving a voice to the voiceless, exposing the very system that now sought his life. Leaving felt, in some ways, like abandoning the people he had vowed to protect. He thought of the victims who had trusted him with their stories, the whistleblowers who had risked their lives to share the truth. Roman feared they would feel deserted. Yet, he also understood that his survival was critical to continuing the fight. As he prepared to leave, he penned a final message to his network. "I'm leaving, but I am not giving up. The truth will follow me wherever I go." Arriving in France was like stepping into another world. The tension Roman carried as he landed was almost suffocating. He braced himself for interrogation, prepared for questions about his past, his intentions, and his identity. Instead, he encountered an unexpected warmth. Officials didn't treat him like a suspect, they treated him like a human being. They explained his rights as an asylum seeker, directed him to resources, and ensured he had a place to sleep that first night. For a man accustomed to constant suspicion and hostility, this initial welcome was overwhelming. In that moment, Roman felt something he hadn't in years: safety. Yet, adjusting to life in exile was far from easy. The bureaucratic maze of asylum applications, residency permits, and language barriers loomed large. Roman often found himself lost in translation, staring at forms he couldn't read, navigating appointments he barely understood. The process was slow, sometimes maddening, but it also gave him time to reflect on the journey that had brought him here. Amid these challenges, Roman encountered profound acts of kindness that rekindled his hope. One such act came from Edith, a retired schoolteacher who volunteered at a local refugee center. Upon hearing Roman's story, Edith didn't just provide him with basic guidance, she opened her home to him. She offered him her spare room, helped him navigate the asylum process, and introduced him to her network of friends who could assist with legal advice, language classes, and job opportunities. One evening, as they sat over tea, Edith said to him, "You've spent so much of your life helping others. Let us help you now." Another significant figure was Sergei, a fellow exile from Eastern Europe, who had built a new life in France years earlier. Sergei understood the struggle of starting over and became an invaluable guide for Roman. He showed him the affordable places to shop, the best free language courses, and the bureaucratic shortcuts that could save hours of frustration. "The system here is slow," Sergei would say with a chuckle, "but at least it doesn't want to kill us." His humor and camaraderie gave Roman the strength to keep pushing forward. These small but powerful acts of kindness helped Roman see that even in an unfamiliar land, humanity had the power to bridge the gaps of language and culture. However, they also brought to light a painful contrast. In his homeland, the system actively sought to crush the vulnerable. In France, while imperfect, the system aimed to protect and uplift. This stark difference often left Roman reflecting on the cruelty he had fled and the justice he still hoped to see replicated worldwide. Despite moments of hope, Roman's path in exile was fraught with uncertainty. The asylum process stretched on for months, leaving him in a state of limbo. Each day brought new questions. Would his application be approved? Would he be forced to return to the very dangers he had escaped? The nights were the hardest. Alone in the quiet of Edith's home, Roman often replayed the events that had brought him here, the faces of those he had helped, the threats that had driven him away, and the unfinished work that still waited for him. Financial struggles compounded his anxieties. While France provided basic support for asylum seekers, it wasn't enough for someone as fiercely independent as Roman. Determined not to become a burden, he took up odd jobs, painting fences, delivering flyers, and even cleaning apartments. These tasks, though menial, became small victories for Roman, symbols of his determination to regain control of his life. Through it all, Roman never lost sight of his mission. Even in exile, he continued his work, collaborating with international human rights organizations to document abuses in his homeland. Late at night, hunched over a second-hand laptop in Edith's spare room, Roman compiled reports that reached audiences far beyond what he could have imagined. His voice, though distant, remained a thorn in the side of the oppressive system he had left behind. One report, in particular, made international headlines. It detailed the systematic torture in detention centers back home, using testimony from whistleblowers Roman had connected with even after fleeing. The report led to condemnations from global organizations and sparked conversations about accountability. For Roman, this was a reminder that exile didn't mean silence. It meant a new way to fight. Exile tested Roman in ways he had never anticipated. It forced him to confront his limits, to trust strangers, and to find strength in the face of profound uncertainty. Yet, it also taught him resilience, the kind born from rebuilding not just a life, but a purpose. France was not the end of Roman's journey. It was the proving ground for the next chapter of his fight for justice. Roman's journey into exile was daunting, but it was not a solitary one. From the moment he left his homeland, he encountered an extraordinary network of support that reminded him of the enduring power of humanity. Strangers from across borders and backgrounds stepped forward, offering not only practical assistance, but also something far more profound: hope. One of the most remarkable aspects of Roman's journey was the diversity of his supporters. These weren't just activists or human rights advocates, they were ordinary people moved by his story. Each act of kindness, whether large or small, became a lifeline that helped Roman navigate the challenges of his new life. In France, Roman was welcomed into a community of exiles who understood his struggle firsthand. Sergei, his first friend in exile, became an anchor. A former journalist who had fled a neighboring country years earlier, Sergei introduced Roman to a network of individuals who had rebuilt their lives after similar circumstances. Through Sergei, Roman met Victoria, a lawyer who had once been a political prisoner herself. Victoria not only offered Roman legal guidance but also shared her story, showing him that survival wasn't just possible, it could lead to renewal. Another ally was Edith, the retired schoolteacher who opened her home to Roman when he had nowhere else to go. Edith went beyond providing shelter. She became a confidant, someone Roman could turn to in his most vulnerable moments. One evening, as Roman expressed guilt over leaving his homeland, Edith reassured him. "You didn't leave them behind. You carried their stories with you, and you're still fighting for them." But Roman's support network wasn't confined to France. Across Europe and even beyond, strangers who had heard of his work reached out to help. There was Paolo, an Italian journalist who arranged for Roman to speak at a conference in Milan, ensuring that his voice remained on the global stage. Then there was Amara, a student from Kenya who had followed Roman's work online and started a crowdfunding campaign to support his living expenses. "Your courage inspired me," Amara wrote in a message. "It's the least I can do." These connections weren't just acts of generosity. They were acts of solidarity. Each person who stepped forward to help Roman was, in their own way, standing against the forces that had sought to silence him. And their support wasn't limited to material aid. Roman received countless messages from around the world, words of encouragement, offers of assistance, and expressions of admiration for his bravery. Each message reminded him that his work mattered, that his voice was still being heard. One particularly striking story came from a group of activists in Germany who had been following Roman's reports. They invited him to participate in a panel discussion on human rights, covering his travel expenses and ensuring his safety throughout the trip. During the event, Roman shared not only the stories of victims from his homeland, but also the struggles he faced in exile. The response was overwhelming. Attendees offered him resources, connections, and even opportunities to collaborate on future projects. For Roman, this wasn't just a chance to speak. It was a reminder that his mission had transcended borders. The solidarity Roman experienced wasn't limited to professionals or activists. Ordinary citizens often showed remarkable generosity. In one instance, a cafe owner in Paris overheard Roman discussing his work with a friend. Moved by the conversation, the owner approached him, offering free meals whenever he needed them. "What you're doing," the man said, "is more important than anything I've done in my life. Let me help you keep going." This wave of support was not without its emotional toll. Roman often felt a deep sense of gratitude, but also guilt. He wondered if he deserved such kindness, especially when so many others still suffered in silence. But these moments of doubt were tempered by the realization that every gesture of support was a testament to the power of community. It wasn't just about helping him, it was about standing for something larger, As Roman reflected on his journey, he often thought about the contrast between the solidarity he experienced in exile and the systemic neglect he had fought against in his homeland. In his country, the vulnerable were silenced and isolated, left to fend for themselves against insurmountable odds. In exile, he found a community that embraced him, people who believed in his mission and were willing to fight alongside him in whatever way they could. This network of support became one of Roman's greatest sources of strength. It showed him that while oppression knows no borders, neither does resistance. The kindness of strangers, the willingness of others to share his burden, reminded him that his fight wasn't his alone. Every helping hand, every word of encouragement was a piece of a larger movement, a movement for justice, for accountability, and for hope. Roman's story is a testament to the power of humanity and solidarity. It's a reminder that in the face of darkness, even the smallest acts of kindness can light the way forward. And for Roman, each of these acts was a spark that kept his mission alive, proving that no matter how far from home he might be, he was never truly alone. Roman's greatest weapon in his fight against injustice wasn't a traditional superpower. It was his unyielding ability to uncover the truth. Armed with determination, resourcefulness, and a deep sense of justice, he exposed those who operated in the shadows, unmasking torturers and corrupt officials who believed their anonymity made them untouchable. In a system designed to protect its enforcers from scrutiny, Roman became a force they couldn't ignore, a modern-day hero armed not with weapons but with facts. His work was methodical, deliberate, and dangerous. Roman didn't just tell stories, he built airtight cases. Using a network of whistleblowers, survivors, and digital tools, he pieced together the identities of those responsible for systemic torture. These weren't nameless, faceless enforcers anymore. They were individuals with names, ranks, and clear responsibilities. For each torturer he unmasked, Roman was dismantling not just a person, but the culture of impunity that allowed these atrocities to thrive. One of Roman's most impactful investigations focused on the commander, a high-ranking official whose name survivors whispered with dread. This individual had allegedly overseen some of the most brutal torture sessions in detention centers, but had managed to avoid accountability for years. Roman painstakingly pieced together evidence, survivor testimonies, leaked internal documents, and even covertly obtained photographs that placed the commander at the scene of the crimes. When he finally published the exposé, complete with the official's name, title, and role in the abuses, the reaction was seismic. Survivors wept in relief, their silent suffering finally recognized. International human rights organizations issued urgent calls for action, and the commander's once impenetrable shield of anonymity crumbled. But Roman's victories came at a steep cost. The system didn't take kindly to his revelations. Almost immediately, a coordinated campaign was launched to discredit him. State-run media branded him a liar, a traitor, and an agent of foreign interests. Online trolls bombarded his platforms with threats and disinformation, attempting to drown out the voices of survivors. One particularly chilling incident involved the release of a fabricated audio recording. In the clip, someone mimicking Roman's voice could be heard allegedly admitting to fabricating reports in exchange for money. Though the recording was quickly debunked, it revealed the lengths to which his enemies would go to destroy his credibility. Roman didn't back down. He knew the system relied on fear and misinformation to maintain its grip on power. His response was to be even more transparent, publishing detailed reports that left no room for doubt. For every smear campaign, he provided irrefutable evidence. For every attempt to silence him, he rallied support from international allies who amplified his voice. Each report he released became a weapon, not just against the individuals he exposed, but against the system that enabled them. One of the most harrowing moments of his journey came when he uncovered a network of secret detention centers disguised as rehabilitation facilities. These centers were nothing more than torture chambers where prisoners were subjected to unimaginable cruelty. Roman's investigation spanned months, involving interviews with former detainees, whistleblower testimonies, and leaked internal memos. He cross-referenced locations, dates, and victim accounts to build a comprehensive report. The evidence he compiled painted a grim picture of a system that thrived on human suffering. When Roman published the report, the response was immediate and overwhelming. The government scrambled to deny the allegations, dismissing his work as propaganda. But the evidence was too damning to ignore. Photographs of the facilities, testimony from survivors, and corroborating documents left no room for doubt. International organizations demanded inspections of the centers, and pressure mounted on the government to address the abuses. Roman's work had once again cracked open the carefully maintained facade of the system. Yet, even as Roman's reports gained international attention, the threats against him grew. Surveillance teams began monitoring his movements. Anonymous messages warned him to stop or face the consequences. His digital platforms were hacked, forcing him to rebuild his work with even more secure measures. In exile, Roman took extraordinary precautions to protect himself and his sources. He relied on encrypted communication, kept sensitive files on secure servers abroad, and limited his public appearances to minimize exposure. Despite these measures, he knew the risk was ever present. But for Roman, the cost of inaction was far greater than the dangers he faced. Roman's unmasking of torturers wasn't just about exposing individual perpetrators. It was about empowering others to speak out. Survivors who once feared retaliation began sharing their stories, knowing they could trust Roman to amplify their voices. Whistleblowers who had remained silent for years found the courage to step forward, knowing Roman would protect their identities while exposing the truth. His work didn't just challenge the system, it inspired a movement. One story stands out vividly. A survivor, initially too afraid to come forward, reached out to Roman after seeing his report on the commander. The survivor shared new evidence, including documents that implicated additional officials in the chain of command. Roman worked with the survivor for weeks, ensuring their identity was protected while building a case that would shake the very foundation of the system. When the new report was published, it not only led to international condemnation, but also inspired other survivors to step forward, transforming isolated voices into a collective outcry. Roman's ability to inspire others wasn't just about his meticulous work, it was about his unwavering courage. Even as threats loomed, he continued to speak out, reminding survivors and whistleblowers that they were not alone. His mission wasn't just about justice for the past, it was about building a future where such injustices could never happen again. Through it all, Roman remained a symbol of hope to those who stood with him, survivors, allies, and advocates. He was more than an activist. He was a hero, proof that even in the face of overwhelming odds, one person's courage could ignite a movement. His story is a testament to the power of truth, the resilience of the human spirit, and the enduring belief that justice, no matter how delayed, is always worth fighting for. Roman often reflected on the path that had brought him to this moment, a journey marked by both profound sacrifices and unexpected triumphs. For all his courage and determination, the emotional cost of his mission was undeniable. The fight against systemic abuse had demanded everything from him: his safety, his homeland, and often his peace of mind. The first sacrifice Roman had to make was the life he had once imagined for himself. Before his work as an activist, Roman had dreams like anyone else: a stable career, a home in his community, perhaps even a family. Those dreams began to slip away the moment he chose to stand against injustice. Each report he published, each torturer he exposed, distanced him further from the possibility of a quiet life. The threats that followed made it clear that the world he had once hoped to build for himself was no longer within reach. Roman often thought back to his childhood home, the streets he knew so well, and the friends he had left behind. He wondered if they would ever truly understand why he had chosen this path. There were nights when he sat in his small room in France, overcome by the memories of a life he had been forced to leave behind. Yet he knew there was no other way. Silence was never an option. The psychological toll was equally profound. Living under constant danger, Roman had to train himself to notice even the smallest details. A car parked too long outside his building, an unfamiliar face in a crowd, always prepared for the possibility of an ambush. In exile, this hyper-awareness evolved into a persistent sense of isolation. Though surrounded by allies, Roman often felt the weight of his mission pressing heavily on his shoulders. It was, after all, his decision to fight this fight. And sometimes, the burden of that choice felt unbearably lonely. Yet, Roman's reflections weren't consumed by regret or despair. Even in his darkest moments, he found strength in the impact of his work. He thought of the survivors whose stories he had helped bring to light, of the whistleblowers who had risked everything to share the truth, and of the global attention his efforts had drawn to a once-hidden epidemic of abuse. These weren't small victories. They were monumental steps toward justice. And for Roman, they were a reminder that his sacrifices were not in vain. One of Roman's most triumphant moments came when a coalition of international human rights organizations cited his reports in their demands for accountability. It wasn't just his homeland's abuses that were under scrutiny. His work had sparked conversations in international courts, with legal experts debating how to hold complicit officials accountable. For Roman, seeing the ripple effect of his efforts was a profound reminder that truth, once revealed, had a power all its own. Another pivotal moment was the formation of a survivor-led advocacy group in his homeland. Inspired by Roman's work, this group began organizing independently, using his reports as a foundation for their own activism. Though Roman could no longer be with them physically, his influence was undeniable. Their courage to speak out, to demand justice, was proof that his mission had taken root in the very community he had fought to protect. Roman often thought of this group as a living legacy of his work, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. Roman also found strength in the unexpected connections his journey had brought him, the allies he had gained. From Edith and Sergei to the countless strangers who had stepped forward to support him, became a second family. They reminded him that while his mission was deeply personal, it was also profoundly communal. The fight against injustice wasn't his alone. It was a shared battle, one that brought people together in the name of something greater. Still, triumphs like these didn't erase the sacrifices Roman had made. He missed the simplicity of his old life, the ability to walk through his hometown without fear, to share meals with friends and family without wondering if it would be their last. There were nights when the weight of everything he had lost felt unbearable. But those moments were tempered by the knowledge that his work mattered, that for every sacrifice he had made, countless others had gained a voice, a platform, and a chance at justice. In his reflections, Roman often returned to a single thought: resilience. His own, yes, but more importantly, the resilience of the human spirit. He had seen it in survivors who refused to be silenced, in whistleblowers who risked their lives for the truth, and in the global community that had rallied behind him. These moments of courage, of defiance, were the true triumphs of his mission. One story in particular stayed with him. A young woman, once imprisoned and silenced, reached out to Roman after seeing his reports. Inspired by his courage, she began to share her own story, revealing evidence of the abuses she had endured. Her testimony, raw and unfiltered, became a cornerstone of one of Roman's most impactful reports. "You gave me the courage to speak," she wrote in her message. For Roman, that single sentence encapsulated everything his work was about. Another letter came from a teenager in a distant country who had been following Roman's story online. "I want to fight injustice too," the letter read. "Your bravery reminds me that we don't have to accept the world as it is." These words moved Roman deeply, reminding him that his work was planting seeds of courage far beyond the borders of his homeland. As Roman looked to the future, he knew the journey was far from over. The fight against systemic abuse was an ongoing battle, one that required relentless dedication. Yet as he reflected on his past, he found something unexpected: pride. Not in himself, but in the movement he had helped create. A movement that proved the power of one voice to inspire many, and the ability of many voices to spark change. Roman's story wasn't just his own, it belonged to everyone who believed in justice, in truth, and in the resilience of the human spirit. Roman's story is far from over. Though he lives in exile, his mission continues with an unwavering resolve. His work has grown beyond his homeland, transforming into a global call for justice. From his small room in France, Roman continues to collaborate with international organizations, documenting abuses, supporting survivors, and amplifying the voices of whistleblowers. His reports, once limited to local incidents, now resonate across borders, reminding the world that injustice anywhere threatens justice everywhere. For Roman, the fight isn't just about exposing corruption or holding perpetrators accountable, it's about building a world where such atrocities can no longer take root. He dreams of a future where every survivor can speak without fear, where systems designed to oppress are dismantled, and where human rights are protected, not exploited. It's a vision that fuels him, even on the hardest days. Roman's vision isn't bound by borders. It's universal. He believes that justice is not just a privilege for the few, but a right for all. And he has dedicated his life to making that vision a reality. The road ahead is long, but Roman remains steadfast. He calls on the global community to stand united against systemic abuse, reminding us that oppression knows no borders, and neither should our resistance. His message is clear. Justice isn't a distant ideal. It's a responsibility we all share. He urges individuals to act, to challenge systems of power, and to stand in solidarity with those who cannot fight alone. "We cannot afford to look away," Roman often says. "Silence only strengthens those who abuse their power." As he reflects on his journey, Roman often returns to the idea of courage. For him, courage isn't the absence of fear. It's the decision to act despite it. It's the survivors who speak up after years of silence. It's the whistleblowers who risk their lives to reveal the truth. And it's the ordinary citizens who choose to stand against injustice, no matter how small their actions may seem. Roman believes that courage is contagious, that one act of bravery can inspire another, creating a ripple effect that has the power to change the world. One example of this ripple effect came when a group of students from across Europe organized a campaign inspired by Roman's work. Using his reports as their foundation, they petitioned their governments to impose sanctions on officials implicated in human rights abuses. These students, many of whom had never met Roman, saw his story as proof that even the smallest actions could contribute to meaningful change. Their campaign succeeded in bringing new scrutiny to the very systems Roman had exposed, proving that his work was inspiring action far beyond his immediate circle. Roman's legacy is already evident. The survivors who once lived in fear are now finding their voices, sharing their stories, and demanding justice. Whistleblowers who once remained silent are stepping forward, inspired by his example. Advocacy groups, both local and international, are using his reports to push for systemic change. Roman's work has shown that even the most entrenched systems of oppression can be challenged, and that change begins with a single voice. But Roman's story isn't just about his fight. It's about the power of collective action. Every ally who supported him, every survivor who shared their story, and every individual who amplified his message played a part in this movement. Roman often says, "I'm just one piece of this puzzle," and yet his courage has been the spark that brought so many others together. The emotional weight of this journey is not lost on Roman. He knows the life he once imagined is gone, replaced by a mission that demands everything, yet he carries no regrets. For Roman, the fight for justice is worth every loss, every struggle, every struggle, every struggle, every sleepless night. Because in the faces of those he has helped, he sees something priceless: hope. Hope that survivors can heal, hope that systems can change, and hope that humanity's capacity for good will ultimately prevail. As Roman looks to the future, he envisions a world where his work is no longer necessary. He dreams of a day when systems of oppression are dismantled, when survivors receive the justice they deserve, and when no one has to flee their homeland to seek safety. It's a vision that seems distant, but for Roman, it's worth pursuing with everything he has. Roman's story is a reminder that change doesn't happen in an instant. It's built through countless acts of courage, persistence, and solidarity. His journey proves that even in the face of overwhelming odds, one individual's determination can inspire a movement. It's a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and a call to action for all of us. To those who hear his story, Roman leaves a challenge. What will you do to fight injustice? How can you turn hope into action? His words resonate not just as a question, but as a call to arms, urging all of us to look beyond our immediate lives and into the broader fight for justice. Roman's courage shows us that we don't need superpowers to make a difference. All it takes is the willingness to act, to speak up, and to stand for what is right. His story reminds us that every voice matters, every action counts, and together we can create a world where justice prevails. In Roman's own words, justice isn't inevitable. It's something we have to fight for every day together. And with that, Roman's legacy becomes ours to carry forward. The fight continues, but so does the hope.